They see the lobby out in the open, engaging in smash mouth politics. People are now fully aware that there is a lobby out there, that it's trying to control the discourse. And in fact, it basically does control the policymakers.
So recently, John Mearsheimer went on Tucker Carlson's podcast to talk about the power of the modern Israel lobby, how it draws us into foreign policy disputes, and why it serves as a force that's not beneficial to the American public. Now, John Mearsheimer is probably the biggest expert on this topic in the entire world. He literally wrote the book on it, The Israel Lobby. His book was Stephen Walt, so I can't wait to get his opinion on this, as well as Tucker. So let's check it out. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
It sounds like our entire foreign policy, at least in the Western Hemisphere, is based on this one country.
Well, I would say in the Middle East.
Well, yeah.
In the Middle East, there is no question. People now call it West Asia, I believe. I call it the Middle East. In the Middle East, our policy is profoundly influenced by Israel. We give, as I said to you before, we have a special relationship with Israel that has no parallel in recorded history. It's just very important to understand it. There is no single case in recorded history that comes even close to looking like the relationship that we have with Israel. Because again, as I said, states sometimes have similar interests, and this includes the United States and Israel,
For sure.
but they also have conflicting interests. And when a great power like the United States has conflicting interests with another country, it almost always, except in the case of Israel, acts in terms of its own interests. America first. But when it comes to Israel, it's Israel first. And if you go to the Middle East and look at our policy there, there's just abundant evidence to support that.
Yeah, there's no denying that. You can see that in modern times when it comes to Iran. The U.S. actually shelved its reasonings for dealing with the Iranians, its dealings with Iran to create a new inspections regime, just to join with Netanyahu and bomb Iran, which basically sabotaged any hope of a new JCPOA that would bring in a new inspections regime and maybe normalize relations like U.S. relations in North Korea were normalized during Trump's first term. You know, that's just wiped off the table because Israel's interest, when clashing with U.S. interests, won out. And it is because of the Israel lobby. It's because of how pro-Israel Trump is and how much pull the military-industrial complex has in this as well. We saw that in Syria, where the U.S. literally supported al-Qaeda about a decade after 9/11 to overthrow Assad's regime that ultimately culminated in the end part of 2024 in December, I believe. And now you have Jolani in power there, al-Shara. He was a former al-Qaeda fighter that founded al-Nusra, which was an al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. He's now the leader of the country. And not only is this just, not brought up at all by mainstream discourse, Trump calls him, a leader with a strong past. And what did he mean by that? He was an al-Qaeda fighter against U.S. soldiers in Iraq. This is treason at the highest level. Even if you look at the Constitution, it says that treason shall consist of levying war against the states or adhering to their enemies. And al-Qaeda was that. I'm sorry, it wasn't Hezbollah. That's why Israel wanted that regime removed, is because some money flowing through it went to Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah didn't attack the towers. I'm an American. I'm not an Israeli. And this is what you see play out all the time.
So then the question, there's so many questions, but the question is why? Like, what is that? And I think it's really causing serious problems in the current ruling coalition because the contradiction is too obvious. It's not America first. And people can see that because it's so evident. But what are the causes of it? Like, why would, for the first time, as you said, in recorded history, a nation spend, whatever it is, $1 trillion a year in effect to serve the interests of another country? Like, why?
Well, I believe there's one simple answer: the Israel lobby. I think the lobby is an incredibly powerful interest group. And I'm choosing my words carefully. It has awesome power. And it basically is in a position where it can profoundly influence U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And indeed, it affects foreign policy outside of the Middle East. But when it comes to the Middle East, and again, the Palestinian issue in particular, it has awesome power.
Yeah, he's right. If you want to see true bipartisanship, take a look at aid to Israel and the votes in Congress about aid to Israel. I mean, if you look at AIPAC, they essentially have at least 400 members of Congress wrapped around their finger doing and supporting whatever the current Israeli regime wants them to do. And just think of that. That's, I think, more than 2/3 of the legislators that exist in the U.S. There are some vocal critics, but not nearly enough. On the right, you have more and more. I think with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie standing up against this nonsense. But on the left, you have some dissidents doing that as well. But those views are few and far between. So for all of these ideas that, opposing political opponents couldn't hate each other more, they sure do agree in many cases about aid to Israel. And, my good friend Tom Woods once said that a lot of times bipartisanship manifests when the party of stupid and the party of evil collaborate to do particularly stupid and particularly evil things at the same time. That's bipartisanship, and that's U.S. aid to Israel and the U.S.-Israeli relationship.
And there's no president who is willing to buck the lobby.
What sort of power is it? Because it's not rhetorical. It's not, the most powerful movements in history are fueled by an idea. It's usually the most powerful or fueled by an idea that it's like true, right? But I never hear anybody make a detailed case for why the United States benefits from the current arrangement. Never. No one, ever. Nikki Haley came as close as anyone by saying the United States gets a lot more out of the relationship than Israel does, but then never explained how exactly that works.
Yeah, he's right. When he asked Ted Cruz that question, Cruz, you could see the wheels in his head spinning a little bit, and then he deflected to another topic, never giving an answer about what U.S. citizens get out of this relationship. When Piers Morgan asked Candace Owens asked Piers Morgan the same question on the Piers Morgan show, you could see the same thing in his head. He couldn't really answer. And Pierce acts like a devil's advocate on all sorts of issues. He's actually pretty sympathetic to the idea that, hey, the U.S. shouldn't bankroll Israel, and especially in regard to the genocide in Gaza. But, no one can answer this. None of Israel's biggest fanatics, its biggest zealots, can ever answer that question. And I posit that that's because there isn't any benefit. There isn't any benefit at all. There never has been outside of negatives. It's drawing the U.S. into fruitless wars, gaining enemies that America didn't have to have. It's bankrolling genocide. It's getting involved in regime change operations that have never been good in Iraq and Syria and in Libya. Just a few examples there. In Iran recently, where regime change seemed to be on the table there. And not to say that there aren't forces in the U.S. that doesn't support that madness either. They obviously are. I pan them all. I'm an equal opportunity warmonger blaster. But that's the truth.
So it's not a matter of convincing people, clearly. So what is it a matter of? Where does that power come from?
Well, let me put this in a broader context. I think that in the past, when I was younger, the lobby operated on two levels. One was the policy level, and two was the popular discourse.
Yes.
And I think in terms of the popular discourse, for a long, long time, right? And this would be well into the 2000s. The Israel lobby basically influenced the discourse in ways that made the Israelis look like the good guys. And it made it look like every time the United States supported Israel, it was because it was in our national interest, right? So the discourse was not at odds with what was happening at the policy level.
Right.
Now, the situation you described, which I think is a perfect description of the situation that we face today, is that the lobby has lost control of the discourse. And people now understand that the United States is doing things for Israel that are not in the American national interest. Furthermore, they see the lobby out in the open engaging in smash mouth politics. People are now fully aware that there is a lobby out there, that it's trying to control the discourse, And in fact, it basically does control. Maybe that's a bit too strong a word, but it's close. It basically does control the policymakers.
So I largely agree with this. I don't think that this is, universal, but it is a phenomenon, especially among younger people. More and more people are waking up to the fact that the U.S. serves to the benefit of Israel, but Israel's part of that alliance doesn't serve the benefit of Americans. I think there is an awakening to some extent, and I think it's largely been created because of the demise of the corporate media, which didn't let any of these stories ever come to light before, and the rise of the new alternative media, the independent media, the podcasters like Tucker's show and Candace Owens' show and Joe Rogan's show. Even though all of those shows have also had Zionists on, it's not a Zionist monopoly anymore. It's not a pro-Israel monopoly. And when you have social media platforms like TikTok, where these videos coming out of Gaza have been distributed, it's hard to deny that. And you have major movements to ban TikTok because of that. Sorry, it wasn't because of Chinese influence. I know that was the tale they were trying to sell you, but it was because of what's coming out of the genocide zone. And you do see this awakening, but I do think it will take several years to kind of pan out in the trajectory to eventually manifest in any kind of political result. So I'm with Mearsheimer, but I don't think it's as, he seems to be presenting it in a way that it's more kind of palpable and tangible than it's playing out yet. But I agree, it's getting there.
So now you have this real disconnect.
Well, it controls the policymakers. I mean, that's demonstrable. I think it's measurable.
Yeah.
So,
yes. But so you have what you were describing is the disconnect between the discourse and the policy world that now exists. But what I'm saying to you is you want to remember that the lobby was immensely successful for a long period of time because the discourse and the policy process looked like they were in sync.
So successful that just basic historical facts about the creation of this nation state in 1948 are like unknown to people. And it's shocking to hear them. And you think, well, that can't be right. That's like so far from what I heard as a child that's obviously what? All the Christians were kicked out. All these Christians were kicked out of their historic homelands there. And of course, many more Muslims. And did that really happen? I mean, people just have no idea what the facts are.
Yeah, man, Tucker's right here. And one thing I would note is that when Mearsheimer said, hey, the discourse of the Israel lobby used to match the Israel policy, that's right. And it's a kind way of saying that now they're only left to propaganda to try to sell this stuff, because that's all it is. It's kind of a hard sell to justify what's happening in Gaza right now, which is the open slaughter of people, the attempted establishment of a concentration zone in the ruins where Rafah once stood. And that's what Katz has been talking about, the minister of Netanyahu. This is greater Israel. They're trying to wipe these people out while expanding West Bank settlements, by the way, and while trying to lay claim to parts of Lebanon and Syria. It's impossible to sell when you have like 60 to 100,000 people dead, various estimates there, and about 150,000 people missing. How can you sell this? It's only to call opponents anti-Semitic. That's the propaganda, where any criticism against Israel is anti-Semitic, and you're just a Jew hater if you do that. That's what they say. And, that's absurd. People are starting to call it out, but he's right. They're only left with propaganda. We've all heard it. It's that, Israel would be wiped off the face of the map if they laid down their arms, which, by the way, they have very strong gun control in Israel. We hear Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, yeah, what they're doing in Gaza isn't exactly defending themselves, and it's not proportionate whatsoever to the attack on October 7th, certainly. But that's, all you hear. It's that you're just a Jew hater if you happen to disagree, and we're trying to cancel you, and you're anti-Semitic. They'll even say that to Jewish critics of Israel like Glenn Greenwald and Jeff Sachs and Dave Smith and Aaron Mattei and Max Blumenthal and all of the best Jewish dissidents that don't like the Israel first mentality.
It's kind of interesting.
Yes, well, the lobby went to great lengths to make sure that you didn't know the facts.
And anyone who said the facts out loud was like a lunatic or a jihadist or a hater of some kind.
An anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Self-hating Jews. It's very interesting. I often think about my own evolution in this regard. When I grew up as a kid, I was heavily influenced by Leon Uris's book, Exodus, and
Yes.
then the subsequent movie with, I think, Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. And that, of course, that Exodus story portrayed the Israelis in the most favorable light and the Arabs or Palestinians in the most negative light. So for much of my life, up until the late 80s, early 90s, I thought the Israelis were, without a doubt, the good guys up against the bad guys. And it was really David versus Goliath.
A lot of us have that story. Actually, I grew up as a hardcore conservative neocon, with the sensibility, like, why wouldn't you support Israel? But then, I actually paid attention and I learned the facts. I read the primary materials and watched the policy unfold, in the mid 2000s. And it's just unavoidable that there's no benefit for Americans. So I think a lot of us do share the story of Mearsheimer, and there's no harm admitting that, by the way. Lots of people learn through living and through experiencing and, being exposed to new things that cast doubt upon ideas that they previously had. And this is no different. And I think that's happening with a lot of people. And there's no shame in it whatsoever.
Well, and the Israelis were David up against an Arab Goliath. That was the picture I had in my head. But then in the late 80s, early 90s, a group of historians in Israel called the New Historians came on the scene.
Benny Morris.
Benny Morris, Avi Schleim, Ilan Pape.
Some of them were amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
I agree.
And what they did was they had access to the archives.
Yes.
And they told the real story.
And that was a moment where I think Israel felt confident enough to allow that conversation internally and that honesty.
I think that's exactly right. The lobby had been so successful.
Yes.
Israel had been so successful.
Yes. I went there. I was amazed. What a beautiful place. Great people. It was great.
Yeah. They thought they had things under control.
They did.
That's right. And that they could allow these historians to tell the truth. Now, I believe they could have gotten away with it if they had stopped expanding or if they had agreed to a two-state solution. The problem is that after the early 1990s, when this literature came out, the Israelis continued to act in barbaric ways towards the Palestinians.
Yeah, especially after 96, when the clean break strategy was formulated that called for not peace with Palestine, not peace with their Arab nations that are adjacent to them, but actually the clean break from that strategy, from the two-state solution and peace with Arab neighbors, to support what was the clean break, and that was to embroil in wars, to just regime change the adjacent nations and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. That's what Likud and Netanyahu embraced, and that's what we're still feeling the punishment and pain from today, in debt and more debt and regime change operations and genocide in Gaza. And Yitzhak Rabin, who did want a two-state solution and did want to adhere to what was called the Oslo Accords, he got offed, likely because of that. And that's what we've seen since 1996.
And
Well, they had a prime minister who tried to reverse the trend, and then I guess he was shot to death.
Right.
he was moving in that direction. I think there were a number of Israeli leaders who understood that the course that Israel was on was unsustainable.
You often heard them say that.
Yeah.
There was a robust debate within the country about this.
Well, whether they would have agreed to a Palestinian state ultimately is an open question. But the fact is, Rabin was killed. Ehud Barak, who made moves towards a two-state solution, ultimately couldn't pull it off. And we are where we are today.
Ehud Barak, the guy that stayed with Epstein for prolonged periods in his Manhattan residence, and was also the former head of Israeli intelligence. That Ehud Barak, yes. But even he wasn't as bad as the worst of them in terms of domestic policy and foreign policy. Netanyahu is.
And the problem is that something else occurred in the late 90s, early 2000s, which fundamentally affected Israel's position, and that's the internet. Because once you get the internet and once you get social media, And the mainstream media is not the sole source of information on these issues. The story about the real creation of Israel and what Israel is doing today is available to the vast majority.
And it's shocking to people. So you have to shut down the internet. You can't allow that.
Yeah, that's some of their solutions, I guess. I think that last point is perfectly made. The internet has changed everything. Trying to kind of shut down the flow of information now, especially in the modern age, it's akin to trying to put a genie back in its bottle. It's just not going to happen. The floodgates have already opened. And Mearsheimer's right about the formation of Israel in the first place, too. This was a globalist UN resolution that manifested in the form of a grand redistribution of land from the Palestinians to Israelis, many of which came there from Europe and were Ashkenazi. They weren't even Semitic in the first place. Much of Israel's administration today isn't even Semitic, including Netanyahu. His family came from Europe. And you had this massive displacement of Palestinians where people were just kicked out of their homes. They enforced this with terrorism. If you don't believe me, read about the Stern Gang, where terrorism in that region started on the Israeli side first, not on the side of Palestinians. And it's just gotten more and more horrific ever since. The constant wars that were created, there were some ebbs and flows and some lulls in those wars, especially after 73. There was some movement, as Mearsheimer said, toward a potential two-state solution in the 80s and 90s. That was basically all changed with the clean break, which was implemented, the U.S. being a major participant in overthrowing many of the regimes that the Israelis wanted, especially Netanyahu. And again, if you don't believe me on this, read Netanyahu's congressional testimony from 2002 and tell me what he said. He said that if you remove Saddam from power, there'll be incredible reverberations of freedom throughout the region. I'm paraphrasing, but he also said that would be true if you deposed Gaddafi in Libya. And he's always talked about wanting to do that with Iran. And, you know, it's just a total nightmare. This foreign policy is unfolded in the worst possible way, but we're told that, you know, we should still support Israel at all costs. No cap on the amount of money that we send them. It's always more and more gradually. It was $20 billion last year after October 7th. Even when you had Netanyahu himself funding Hamas just weeks prior to that by giving the head of Mossad money to exchange hands in Qatar to fund Hamas, because Netanyahu always wanted to fund Hamas because he believed doing so would prevent the possibility of a Palestinian state arising, because who would negotiate with these, you know, terrorists, Hamas? He had every benefit in the world from trying to prop them up. And he's faced the wrath of some circles of journalism in Israel for doing this. Both Haaretz and the Times of Israel have reported on this. Virtually no one in the United States reports on this. But yeah, I think the internet has shifted the balance completely, opened people's eyes, and kept the horrors, you know, flowing in a way that it's impossible to divert your eyes from. You can't get away from seeing what's coming out of Gaza and these videos on TikTok and X. I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle, and I think it's going to be, you know, maybe another generation until Americans lose interest completely in supporting Israel, because right now there is a big demographic shift in favor of that direction, where it's mostly old people that want to keep the money flowing into Israel and young people that have serious questions about Israel or are outright opponents of Israel and funding Israel. And that's where we're at. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think that the Israel lobby will lose power over time in the near future in America? What will it take? What are some of the worst ramifications of Israel's relationship with the U.S. for Americans? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker Carlson as well. This interview is awesome. Thank you, John Mearsheimer. He is a legend as well. Extremely brilliant man. And please also consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, I'll appreciate your support for the channel. And as thanks, I will give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube to the general public. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. And remember that the deep state remains the same regardless of the names. Take care, everyone. Have a good one.